In almost a year since the inauguration of President Trump, the planet is transforming in other ways, with the American superpower slowly retreating from global leadership. At least that's what a lot of world leaders are saying. The vacuum is creating a new world order. And I just sat down with the former head of British intelligence, the former MI6 chief, John Sawyers. He has also been British ambassador to Egypt, and he was based in New York as ambassador to the United Nations. So I asked him about the looming challenges of 2018 and also about what went right this year. John Sawyers, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, as we close out this year, what you think are the biggest threats and the biggest challenges. And I want to be a little provocative, because you said in Herzliya, Israel, no less, that you thought one really had to take into account the challenges posed by President Trump. And specifically, you said that the biggest threat to the world, as you see it, is how we all adjust to the progressive withdrawal of responsible American leadership. I mean, you think Trump is the biggest threat to the world?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that President Trump is bringing a new approach to America's role in the world. He has said himself he wants to put America first. Now, most American presidents for the last 70-odd years have seen America's role as the stabilizer of the international system, as the guarantor of peace and stability and, as far as possible, open markets. And that's what we used to call American exceptionalism, that America was exceptional because it wasn't simply pursuing its national interest. We now have an America which is primarily, in fact, overwhelmingly, pursuing its national interest. And so it's the end of American exceptionalism. Now, other countries have to adapt to that.
OK, so if you're an American, or if you're any national, a Briton, in Brexit Britain, you would say to yourself, what is wrong with that? Surely that is better for me, citizen of the United States.
I'm not saying it's necessarily right or wrong. I regret it because I think America was a really respected, powerful, admired nation, and American values were emulated and aspired to around the world.
And this could stop that?
I think we're coming to the end of that period. I think what we're now seeing is America acting like a powerful nation-state pursuing its own national interests. Now, that's America's choice. And, you know, President Trump was elected by the American people in part because of the new approach that he has put forward.
So let's move that on, because we're speaking now a few days after President Trump unveiled his new national security strategy, and that focused quite heavily on a little bit of what you're saying, in that President Trump and his administration believes that the three-decade holiday from superpower rivalry with the collapse of the Soviet Union, all that, is actually going to come back on the table. How do you read that? Is that China, Russia, the United States, all rivals now and seeking out the kind of stuff that we saw in the Cold War time?
I think there's something to this analysis. I wrote myself an article in the Financial Times about this a few months ago, that the world is developing in a way in which China and the United States are going to be the two crucial global powers, and they're going to have to operate alongside one another. We're not in a world which is dominated by the United States and its allies, and others like Russia and China are on the fringes. You now have a world where China and the United States have to engage with one another and resolve and address international issues, whether it's ones of peace and stability or about trade or climate change, have to address these issues together. Russia, of course, is an assertive military power. Other countries like India, Japan, Europe, Britain are significant economic powers. But the three major ones, China, United States and Russia, are going to be operating more like traditional major powers, jostling with one another, cooperating in certain areas and confronting each other in other areas. That's a different sort of world than the one we've lived in for the last 70 years.
Because do we want to live in a China-led world?
Well, no. We'd much rather live in an American-led world. But I think the reality is that China's economy in purchasing power terms is already greater than the United States.
And its massive infrastructure program and investment all over, beyond its region even.
Well, I think China has a strategy for the 21st century. And that strategy is to become the leading global power in the Eurasian continent. Its Belt and Road Initiative is a fantastic economic opportunity for countries affected, but it has a global strategy behind it. And the United States can't just wish this away or contain it and pretend it can remain the global dominant power. It's a new reality that China and the United States are co-global powers, and they have to find a way to coexist and to solve together global problems rather than constantly butting up against each other and confronting each other.
So China was quite put out when this national security document was released. President Trump actually spoke very moderately and with moderation when he delivered the executive summary. But the actual 55 pages contains some very harsh language about China, a strategic competitor, taking America for a ride, you know, having an unfair economic program. If you were China, what would you be thinking, particularly at a time when America wants you to help, you know, tame North Korea?
Well, first of all, I think China sees the Trump presidency as actually more of an opportunity than a threat. I think they believe that they can deal with President Trump, they know how to play him, and that this is a big strategic opportunity for China to displace a lot of American power and influence around the world. For example, if you go to European capitals, you ask what's most important to them, they'll say international trading system. We agree with China on that, we're worried about the American position. They'll say the international rules-based order, where America is moving away from that. They'll say climate change, where America is standing away from the international consensus and China is part of the consensus. Now, I'm not saying that Europe has more in common with China than it does with America, but when you look at a few crucial policies of the Chinese leadership and the American administration, actually Europe's policies are closer to China's than they are to America's. And that's wrong. That's something that has to be addressed.
How?
Well, I think it's really about America recognizing what the long-term global interest is. It can't be right that America is pursuing bilateral trade balances around the world and not looking at its global trade balances. It's already given China a massive boost by withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The president believes that gives America a massive boost.
Well, he's pretty much alone in international opinion in thinking that, because certainly the other nations involved see it as a huge advantage for China that the United States has just given them.
So let me ask you, because, I mean, the big looming threat, presumably you would agree, is North Korea. I mean, that is probably going to be our 2018, is going to be consumed by North Korea.
I think it is the most dangerous, combustible crisis we have to manage.
So I wonder what you make of reports that have come out today since there's been some meetings and Rex Tillerson has been talking about. Apparently, the United States and China have started to have contingency talks, military to military. Apparently, they took place in Washington last month about how they would jointly deal with a potential conflict or collapse of North Korea. And Rex Tillerson has talked about it. Apparently, they have said that they have assured the Chinese that they would never, if ever they landed forces in North Korea, ever occupy North Korea. They would retreat back south of the 38th parallel. This is amazing detail that's coming out.
But it's very important that it happens. And one of my concerns in the last 6 months has been that thinking in Washington is going down a path which says containment of North Korea is not actually realistic or desirable for America. Either they have to back down and agree on a negotiated deal, or we'll have to confront North Korea. There'll have to be a day of reckoning, which is a euphemism for a military strike. Whereas in Beijing, my sense has been that they don't really believe that Americans are serious about a military strike. They think this is a bluff to get them to take tougher sanctions against North Korea. I think that mismatch of expectations is really dangerous, because you could then have a situation where America launches a strike and China is not ready for it. So in this dangerous situation, of course, we must all press the North Koreans to get into a negotiation which means they stop short of having an ability to land a nuclear weapon on the continental United States. I think it's unlikely they'll agree to that.
Unlikely.
Unlikely that they will back down. So it's ever more important that China and the United States are involved in an intense discussion, not just of things that could go right, like a diplomatic negotiation, but things that could go wrong, and where China and the United States will be militarily present in the same theatre, and they both are desperate to avoid a repeat of the 1950s, where they ended up in direct confrontation with each other.
So with H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, this week saying that we're committed to a resolution of this crisis, but he would not say that they were committed to a peaceful resolution. You've been at the table in the run-up to the Iraq War and other such negotiations. How do you stop this getting to an Iraq war situation and getting to a negotiated settlement? Can you see the parameters of a diplomatic resolution to this crisis?
I think there are a number of ways it can be resolved, short of a military confrontation. And I don't believe that on North Korea in 2017, we are in the position, say, we were in Iraq in 2002. In 2002, America was set on an invasion of Iraq. It was just a question of how and when. That's not the case with North Korea.
Well, you have 30 seconds to tell us what is going right in the world.
I think there are a number of important parts of the world where we're seeing progress. In Saudi Arabia, we've got a new leader who is bringing about much-needed reform and is trying to address the problem of Islamic extremism. That's really important. He's made some mistakes in the region, but nonetheless, I think having a new direction of reform is important. I think in South Africa, we've just seen a new, very much more modern-minded, business-friendly leader elected as head of the ANC. I think we could arrest South Africa's decline. In Argentina, a country that's been mired in populism and underperformance, we've had a leader in place now for over 2 years who's taking Argentina in a new and more dynamic direction. Now, these aren't global powers, but they're important regional countries, taking their people down the road. For example, Indonesia was going down 15 years ago. For major regional powers to be turning a corner and becoming more democratic, more market-oriented, delivering goods for their own people, that's good for global peace and security.
So Britain was a major power. I mean, no matter how you look at it, it's always punching above its weight and was very much important at any table, whether it's NATO, the UN, wherever it might be. Brexit?
Well, my country is going through a difficult period. I think Brexit is a mistake. I think us leaving the European Union is a backward step for the United Kingdom. But it looks as though it's going to happen. And we're going to have to address the economic impact of that and the impact it has on our standing in the world, both of which, at least in the short term, will be negative. I don't think it's impossible. We went through a difficult period in the 60s and 70s, and we recovered. We had a dynamic economy. We had powerful global leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, and we invested in our military, in our intelligence, in our diplomacy, and in our development programs. You've got to have a powerful economy, respected leaders, and the means to make an influence in the world in order to be a recognised power. We're going through a difficult period. I think we can recover as a country, and I think our partnership with America and the American people will survive the arrival of new politics represented by President Trump and represented by Brexit.
And the special relationship, how does that survive given the, Britain first tweets, given the kind of war of words he's having with the Mayor of London, and an unpopular president overseas plans potentially to come to Britain in the new year, according to the White House. Yeah. How do you think he'll be received on the streets, in Whitehall, at the palace?
It's really important that American and British leaders talk to one another regularly, not just on the phone, but face-to-face and visit each other's countries. Of course, President Trump, because he's a controversial figure, won't be universally welcomed. But I think it's right that he should come, and it's right that he should hear at first hand some of the criticism from America's closest ally about reasons why we have concerns about the direction of America. So he should come. The relationship should be close. In my time at the UN, as ambassador abroad, as a policy director, as the chief of intelligence, I had my most intense exchanges with my American counterparts. And we had some of our biggest disagreements with America. Working with allies, fighting alongside allies, is a difficult business. But the depth of that relationship, the cultural affinity we have for one another, the approach we take to intelligence and evidence-based solutions, to the common values we have, I think will prevail.
And that is a good note to end on. John Sawyers, thanks.